If I were to show you this picture, you would probably think, oh wow, that's a cool tank. Why is there a middle finger on top? And primarily, why is it pink? A symbol of liberation or Soviet oppression standing in the middle of Prague. Unsurprisingly, it didn't always used to be pink. On the 5th of May 1945, the city of Prague rose up against the German occupiers in what is now known as the Prague Uprising. Fighting went on for several days, only ending days after the unconditional German capitulation, together with the Prague offensive by the Soviet Union, which would be their last major offensive of the war. In an effort to commemorate the Soviet liberation, a copy of the first Soviet tank to enter Prague was placed on a massive 5-meter high stone pedestal with the barrel pointing to the west. The liberation of Prague was politically significant, as similar to Berlin, there was a sort of race to get to Prague between the Allies and the Soviet forces. After the Allies entered the Czechoslovakian territory, the British Prime Minister Churchill wanted to keep on pushing towards the city. The Americans, however, did not want to antagonize Stalin and agreed to a demarcation line in which the Soviet troops would liberate the city. This liberation was significant, as the Czechoslovakian people, not fully knowing about the demarcation line, again saw this moment as Czechoslovakia not being a priority for the West, whereas Stalin, allegedly, did care for the future of his country. The memories of the betrayal of the Munich Conference, where the Sudetenland was handed over to the Germans, was still fresh on the mind of many of the Czechoslovakian people, which at the time Stalin publicly opposed. Historians argue that this moment, the liberation of Prague by the Soviet forces, is the moment where Czechoslovakia was indefinitely lost for the West. This further disappointment made Western-minded democratic forces lose enough popular support to the communists that the Communist Party would lead the country in the new post-war world. To commemorate this historic moment, Stalin wanted to create a monument of the first Soviet tank to enter Prague. Lieutenant G. Goncharenko's IS-2M heavy tank would be placed in the city center to forever remember the sacrifices the Soviet forces made to liberate the city, and to keep the memory alive that it was they, the Soviet army, which liberated Czechoslovakia and Prague. Because how poetically fitting was it that a IS-2M model heavy tank, the pride of the Soviet Union, carrying the name of the supreme leader, was the first one to enter and liberate Prague. This glorious story leaves out one very important detail, because how does this tank end up like this? Before we delve into that story, there is one thing you should know. Everything I just told you on what this monument is supposed to represent is a lie. The monument, formerly known as the Monument to Soviet Tank Crews, bears the number 23 on the side. It was well known that it was not the exact tank Lieutenant Korynchenko entered Prague in, as his tank was destroyed in street fighting shortly after. However, Korynchenko's tank had borne the tactical marking I-24, not 23. And that is not the only thing that is different. As a matter of fact, it was an entirely different tank model. The Soviet tank which first entered Prague was the much more common T-34 medium tank. But Stalin wanted to show off the grandeur and the might of the Soviet army, so the much larger and stronger newly developed IS series tank was put on the monument instead, still claiming that this was the tank which liberated Prague. In reality, the IS model was quite new and still suffered from some logistical problems, thus at the time it was barely used by the Soviets. Yet in this way Stalin wanted the world to think that the Soviet army was much stronger than actually was the case. And this is not even the most absurd lie surrounding the monument. The Soviet army were not actually the ones to liberate Prague, and I'm not even talking about if the Soviet occupation would count as a liberation attempt. No, remember that this video started with the Prague Uprising, where the citizens of Prague rose up to fight the German occupiers. It was primarily these citizens, the Czechs, which liberated themselves. Yet, it is true that they probably would not have won if it were not for a foreign army coming to the rescue. But this army was not the Soviet army, but the Russian Liberation Army, which is a collaborationist army consisting of mostly former Soviet prisoners of war, white Russian refugees, and veterans from the anti-communist White Army under the new command of the defected Russian general Vlasov. After briefly fighting on the collapsing Eastern Front, the Russian Liberation Army wanted to capitulate to the Allies, both hoping to get more favorable capitulation terms and hoping that the Allies would use the ROE in their inevitable future war against the USSR. On their march south, the ROE came to the aid of the Prague uprising against the German occupation and the Waffen-SS units which had the task to level the city. The battle was fierce and deadly, and only ended when a ceasefire was made, which allowed the German troops to leave the city in exchange for surrendering some armaments. When the Soviet forces finally arrived, the German forces were already on full retreat, with the exception of some small isolated and surrounded pockets. The Soviet forces only lost 10 men in their so-called liberation of Prague, versus the thousands upon thousands of Czech and ROE casualties. This does not discount the sacrifices made by the Red Army on the Eastern Front, but to suggest that the Soviet forces liberated Prague, like the monument is supposed to represent, that simply is a lie. These events were not forgotten by the Czech people, and the monument to Soviet tank crews was controversial since its inception, with the lies surrounding it being public knowledge, yet illegal to acknowledge. The monument became more and more a symbol of oppression rather than liberation after the Prague Spring in 1968, when the Czech government started a period of economic decentralization and political democratization. This resulted in Czechoslovakia being invaded by the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact members to end the liberalization of their country. The public resistance to the Soviet invasion was violently put down, often using the same tanks as placed on the monument to Soviet tank crews, the Josef Stalin tank series. The number 23 on the side of the monument became a more uncomfortable symbol of oppression, as the Soviet invasion came exactly 23 years after 1945, which was the year of the so-called liberation of Prague. The people of Czechoslovakia eventually got their freedom during the Velvet Revolution in 1989, with free elections following the next year, with the Soviet monument of tank crews becoming victim to scrutiny, with people arguing that there are neither moral nor historical grounds for preserving the monument. On the night of the 27th of April 1991, art student David Czerny and friends painted the tank pink and erected a large middle finger on the tank as a form of protest. Czerny was arrested shortly after for hooliganism, an often abused law, with the tank being painted green again after an official protest by the Soviet government. However, politicians from the newly elected pro-Western parties painted the tank pink again, using their diplomatic immunity as a protest for the arrest of Czerny. This cat-and-mouse game did not stop there, with the tank being painted pink and back to green again numerous times until the monument was finally removed and placed in a military museum in the south of the country, where it remains to this day. Czerny was eventually released, and the pink tank, including the middle finger, made one more return to Prague in 2011 to commemorate the 20-year anniversary of the withdrawal of the Soviet forces. On the place where the tank stood now stands a fountain with a small plate which commemorates the memory of all the people who fell during the actual liberation of Prague. The pink tank today is still on display, but no longer as a monument of liberation or repression, but as a monument for the struggle the Czech people had to endure and the lies and the rewriting of history the Soviets placed upon them.